Check, check. I hope I'm audible. All right. So let's get started with today's class. Good evening, everyone. Just give me one moment to confirm that everything is in place. One moment. All right. Great. Good evening, everyone. Let's start with today's class. Everything seems to be working fine. In case you have any doubts, do let me know. Okay. So for starters, before we talk about the introduction, etc. Uh, let's say you are preparing for VRC already and you have had some experience with the question paper, then you would know what VRC consists of, right? What is generally asked. So, if you have no idea about it, however, I'll give you a very basic introduction. VARC is asking us RCs of reading comprehensions, or essentially comprehension tests of sorts. Earlier, different stuff was included. Fill in the blanks were included, synonyms were included, antonyms were included. But if you've seen the recent papers, almost close to a decade now since 2015, they have not asked any synonym, antonym, fill in the blank sort of questions. What they have focused on is whether you can comprehend information. All right. So that's the broad idea. You get passages of differing lengths and you get different questions or different things that you're supposed to do with passages of differing lengths. Okay. That's what the question type is about essentially. One moment. All right. So let's actually take a look at what, let's compare CAT to other exams and what we're supposed to do now in the current format. So if you notice CAT, ZAT, NMAT, SNAP, TISNET, CMAT, MyCAT, this is all that CAT focuses on. Just forget what 3P, 4Q means right now, but RC passages are there, para summary questions are there, para jumble questions are there, and para completion questions are there. So we'll discuss each question type. And the as far as these type of questions go, critical reasoning, grammar, poem, vocabulary, etc., all these remaining questions. So actually, there was a time when CAT only used to ask all these questions, and very few of these exams existed. Maybe ZAT existed, right? So it's only recently that in the past decade we can say that CAT has stopped asking these questions. Now, why am I talking about this? This is important because our direction of preparation, initially at least, eventually many of you might end up giving CAT, ZAT, and let's say NMAT, SNAP. These would be quite common. But initially, our preparation needs some direction, and our direction should be fully about CAT and whether we can understand any passage. Right? This is what we are tested on. Understand any passages, basically whether we can comprehend any information. Because all of these questions are checking comprehension in some way. Para completion you may not have heard of. We'll take a look at these. You can tell what summary is, and para jumbles is a mix of information. But essentially, it's all about whether we can comprehend any text-based information. All right. So that's what is expected from us. So let's work and build towards a strategy that can bring us somewhere close to our ideal score. Let's start with the idea of what is exactly required from me, right, from the student. So let's say VRC has 24 questions, 20 are MCQs, 4 are not MCQs. And if you notice 16 questions, 4 passages of 4 questions, right? This is what this was trying to say. three passages of four questions. This should be four passages of four questions. Not only this, it's not necessarily always going to be four passages of four questions. They might change that number. But what we can expect is around 16 questions from reading passages. This is something we can rely on, sort of. And for verbal ability, we have eight questions, which include para jumbles, para completion, para summary, and odd sentence. We'll see each of these question types today, but our broad focus is on the strategy for, let's say, 99 percentile, or whatever is your ideal score. But this is what we're focused on, right? So to get back to this idea, we are being tested on whether we can comprehend multiple types of information. So let's see how we can, what exactly is expected in this comprehending process and how we can get better at it. Yep. Now these are different slots, and this is the 2024. This analysis, by the way, you'll find on the Career Launcher website. So as you can tell, so you have reading comprehensions, and like I said, this number more or less remains the same. Even the number of passages more or less remains the same, but this number can change, right, more frequently than this number. In any case, here you have 16 questions from passages and the remaining questions, as you can see. Okay, so now let's start working on why VRC is different. What is expected out of us that requires a slightly separate approach? So the main idea, and this is actually kind of important, this is this inherent challenge in the VRC process, is that when you read a passage, be it short or long, right, up to, we can expect, based on recent patterns, we can expect anything up to 450 words. So if you, or let's say like a 150 to 200 words passage for para summary, if you have any kind of passage like this, uh, what you do require to really comprehend it very quickly is to have a title and a subtitle, right? But we don't get that in the exam, right? In the exam, all we get is some passage like this. Now if you notice, let's try reading this. Colonialism is not a modern phenomenon. World history is full of examples of one society gradually expanding by incorporating adjacent territory and settling its people on newly conquered territory. So colonialism is not modern. World history is full of such examples. In 16th century, colonialism changed decisively because of technological developments in navigation. Uh, then modern European colonial projects emerged. The term colonialism is used to describe the process of European settlement in XYZ places. So colonialism is not modern. It's full of examples how navigation changed it, and how modern colonialism is essentially European settlement in certain parts of the world. So we did not have main point, and what I just did by running through the information again was build this, which is, I currently, when I reread the passage for you and certain words in the passage for you, I actually created a frame of reference for reading, correct? So since there is no frame of reference, actually our reading process is trying to check a few things. It's trying to check, can you understand something for which you have no context or frame of reference for? No context implies you don't know title or subtitle, and you also don't know subject of discussion. By don't know here, I mean the subject of discussion is alien to you. Like, you might not like philosophy, or you might not like economics. The passage could be from any area, right? So you don't know topic of discussion. So one is this unknown, right? And the other is, let's make this clear, don't like, you don't like the topic of discussion. And the other is a subject that causes you challenges. Okay, so this is one inherent idea in the VRC passage process, which we have to overcome through certain reading habits. So for our strategy to, maximize our marks, I essentially want to highlight certain key reading processes that you need to develop, right? And the other thing is no real formula or axiom for solving. This is important because when we are actually comparing methods, or when we are transferring knowledge from one person to another about how to solve a particular question, this is much easily done in logical reasoning questions and quant questions, where there's some axiom or sort of process that is imposed by the subject. If you're making a railway timetable, suppose in the reasoning section, so you know that based on certain bullet points you need to figure out some timetable, right? In quant there'll be some problem given, and based on this you need to use some formula, right? So since there are formulae and there are methods that the subject prescribes to us, since there is this thing, you can communicate how to solve a particular question better in these disciplines, in logical reasoning and quant. In verbal, or let's say in passages, there is no such way. A real challenge for me and for you also would be to actually, for me it's to communicate the idea to you, and for you it's actually to change your reading process. Because the reading process that you apply, and especially when there's a timer involved, the reading process that you apply goes back to whatever is your native autopilot reading process. Whatever habits, good or bad, you may carry since before in your reading, are going to start appearing if you run short of time and you're reading on autopilot. So what you really want to do is read in a way that the exam expects you to read, correct? So expects you to read is a little hard for me to communicate, because I have to tell you the process of reading, and it's very hard for you to actually pay attention and absorb it. So if you really want to make any linear gains in terms of your marks, or if you want a strategy that is going to actually uh, help you succeed in a linear way, like make gains in each successive paper, then that means you can do two things, right? The first thing you can do is, since there is no real formula or axiom for solving, and this is important, write down this for probably one of the most important points for strategy. Each time question is wrong, figure out, I'll change the color just for this, exactly why. Right? Figure out exactly why you went wrong. And what I mean by exactly is, there will always be a word either in the passage, doesn't mind the length of the passage, or in one of the options, or even in the question, that you either misunderstood or you overlooked. Right? Each time a question is wrong, figure out exactly why. Check which word or phrase that you either overlooked or misunderstood. This sounds simple. There'll be a solution given to each answer in the. So if you take the career launcher mock test, along with the mock test, there'll be answers, and in those answers there'll be explanations for why. Let's say, why is D the best summary? So some explanation would be given for why is D the best summary, and you've gone with option B as the right answer. Okay, what if you get B wrong and you read the explanation of D sort of doesn't make sense to you? What happens is most students will move on to the next question. And that's where you don't actually make any development in VRC. You might end up practicing, but it doesn't lead to actual improvement. If you want to figure out what is exactly going wrong, it'll always boil down to some specific phrase. Like I said, the phrase may be in the question stem, although rare. It may be, certainly maybe in the options, or it may be somewhere in the passage. But there is something, some word or phrase that you either overlooked or misunderstood. This is the first important bit of change in your approach to questions that you will have to adapt for adopt for VRC. And that's because the quant and reasoning processes are not as complicated. Understanding errors in quant and reasoning is not as complicated. All right. uh, so these are two challenges that you'll have to overcome, and I've already spoken about what you really need to do for this, which is figure out why or where exactly you went wrong. One moment. All right, let's okay, let's look at the other way that we can actually start making any gains, right? And I told you there are two ways to actually make sure that we have overcome this issue. One is, like I said, to figure out the word or phrase. The second is, and I'll get to the second soon. We first, let's say, we have simplified and evaluated a particular passage. The second way we can actually make sure that we are really, not making the second mistake is methodical approach. Now, what does methodical mean, and why is that again something which sounds boring really and sounds not as important? Why am I including that as a crucial point in strategy? See, what most people will discuss in strategy is they may discuss these things, but there's more stress given on things like, level of difficulty of questions, which to solve, which to not solve, right? This could be one. The other thing that people pay often attention to when they're discussing, strategy tips is like a trick to solve a question, trick to solve faster or read faster, right? Stuff of that nature. What I want us to actually do is those things, it's not like they're unimportant. Those things are important, but they would only become important once we set up strategy wise fundamentals which are going to help us achieve a really big score first. That's sort of, let's say, that's polishing whatever is already a skill or fine tuning your skill. Okay, so simplify and evaluate. I want to show this to you using an actual passage. uh, One moment. Okay, so let's take a passage like this. Okay, I just want all of you all to, this is a previous year question. Some of you may have already seen this. This is a 2023 question. uh, I just want you to go through the passage again. I'll just wait for a moment, and then using the options, I'm actually going to illustrate how to simplify and evaluate, which is our basic idea that we need to know, and then how to improve on that idea I'll discuss as I solve the first question. So I've already read the passage. Some of you may already know this. So let's quickly go through this. I'll just wait for a moment. I'm not showing you the options yet because I want to illustrate something. So please just read the passage once. All right. So now this is, like I'd already told you this, we don't know title or subtitle. We have to sort of figure out which words indicate the main point or summary of the author. So let's say, I'll not go into the details, but let's say this is the topic of the author, right? And about this topic, the author tells us colonialism is not modern, it's old, and it has changed. Colonialism has changed decisively due to navigation, and modern European colonial project has been used as an illustration. So let's say about this topic, the author has told us these three things, right? For now, let's not get into about topic A, author says B, and all of those details. Some of you may have seen my other classes in which I've discussed the question in that light, but we'll get to that later. Right now, I want to focus on strategy. So this is the topic, right? This is what the author was really. This is the main point of the author. All right. Now go through these four options and figure out which of them is the best summary. Please get started. All right. So I think some of you would have solved already. For the others, I'll start discussing the options anyway. So let's look at the first option. I'm trying to summarize the author's idea here, and I'm trying to explain to you why, if I simplify the passage first, and then, so if I simplify the passage first, and then go to the second stage, which is evaluate, is really important. uh, Again, sounds simple. What is going to happen is a lot of erratic reading happens. Many students will read this briefly or not clearly enough and then start with the options and then go back to the passage multiple times, which is going back to the passage to check is valid. But what I mean is, unless and until you have a clear idea of what is discussed here, you should not reach the evaluation stage, which is what we tried to achieve by separating the options from the passage. So you get to focus on the passage first. So this is our first stage of simplifying. And then as I go through each option, colonialism surged in the 16th century due to advancements in navigation. This is valid. Enabling British settlements, we are told European settlement in the passage, abroad and global dominance. Global dominance also, political domination. So global dominance can be acceptable. What is difficult to accept is enabling British. Although European is discussed, British would be incorrect, right? Saying British settlements would be invalid. So this is a factual error. So option one is incorrect. The real problem with option one, however, is it's not telling me that colonialism is not modern, right? So we can say main point is partial. So statement one is incorrect. Let's look at statement two. As a result of developments in navigation technology, European colonialism led to displacement of indigenous populations and global political changes in the 16th century. We In option two also we are given the same fact that navigation technology led European colonialism to displace. But what we are not told exactly in option two is that colonialism changed due to navigation. This is not exactly clear. Also, it's not modern is not mentioned. So two is invalid for, let's say, main point partial. Right, then let's compare option three. Colonialism, conceptualized in the 16th century, allowed colonizers to expand their territories, establish settlements, and exercise political power. Option three cannot be accepted because it says colonialism conceptualized in the 16th century. So, even about the topic Option 3 is misstating a fact. So option 3 is clearly invalid. We're left with option 4. Option 4 says technological advancements in navigation in the 16th century transformed colonialism, enabling Europeans to establish settlements and exert political dominance over distant regions. Okay, so 4 is the right answer. If you notice, option 4 also has main point partial, meaning option 4 is not exactly saying that colonialism is not modern. What I mean by not modern, I've repeated this 3 times, is the author is telling us that the world history is full of examples of one society gradually expanding. So it's colonialism is not only old, it's actually quite common because of its full examples. Correct. So that idea has been missed by not just options 1, 2, and 3. It's also missed by option 4. But only by evaluating options did I realize that even though option 4 does have some problem with it, it's the only possible choice, right? It's the only way I can accept some summary of the author. So, what I wanted to illustrate through this process was that having a basic idea or process that we follow throughout VRC is important, which is simplifying anything that you see and evaluating anything that you're supposed to choose between. This, as a broad description, is enough. The details of each step I'll try and illustrate with each question. Now, what we did was we first went through the passage and we comprehended it. But we have to comprehend different length of sentences. We have to comprehend difficult words, and we have to comprehend new concepts. And notice I'm saying comprehend difficult words and comprehend new concepts. I'm not saying I should know them before, which is what vocabulary means. Vocabulary means how many words do you know? Let's say, like a very simple version of vocabulary, the meaning of vocabulary. But comprehension essentially means that even if you may not know a few words, even if you may not know a few difficult words, can you still grasp the meaning of the author? All right. So we need this ability to comprehend, and these 3 factors, length of sentences, difficult words, and new concepts, are used by the examiner to increase and decrease the level of difficulty of the passage or the option. So remember these 3 factors in terms of fine tuning your skills. You should always keep in mind that these 3 factors will determine level of difficulty. So students will often ask, how do I drop a passage? How do I decide which question to not solve? You can usually scan through the first few sentences of the passage, and that's ample time and effort. By scan, I'm saying literally like 10, 12 seconds is too much time. Just visually look for length of sentences, look at certain words and are they difficult or not, and concepts. So you'll get a good idea whether a passage is in your sort of area or wheelhouse in terms of solving. Okay. So first is we need comprehension ability. Why do we need a methodical process of solving? The truth is that in VRC there is no one method. So there are students who are already really good at it, and the problem is that, however, even for those students, consistency is very hard in scores. Right, consistency in really high scores, consistency gets hard because the methodical approach starts to slip. When you're trying to get like a 99.9 percentile, not only are you trying to attempt nearly the full paper, you're also trying to be accurate as much as possible, right? So speed is really important, and accuracy is really important. So you should pay attention to the right amount of information in the given time. And since, like I said, the level of difficulty of passages keeps shifting, the consistency of students also keeps shifting. Because there is no underlying method that they use, there is no specific routine that they rely on when they solve, their consistency goes for a toss. So the first big thing that I told you here was, right, there's no real formula or axiom. So each mistake, check word or phrase that you either missed or you overlooked. So this is the key thing that will allow you to make any improvement in VRC. Otherwise, you know what's going to happen. You'll be like, I don't know what's happening. I don't like the solution. It doesn't make any sense to me. And you'll probably, or whatever the teacher is saying doesn't make any sense to me. And you'll probably move to the next question. That actually leaves a lot of gaps in your understanding of what went wrong. So each mistake, search for the word or phrase that went wrong. This is really the first thing that I want you to remember. Second thing that I really want to highlight is develop a consistent way to solve a question. Preferably, you know, something that someone with experience teaches you. You can also come up with it on your own, but that method should allow you to be accurate over time. 3, 4, 5 mock tests, your consistency in your scores should remain high, and it should be similar. Okay. Okay. So the third thing that we need to discuss is the evidence based approach that I already displayed in the question. Right, for each decision we made here, I used a specific word or phrase that helped me with the decision. British here is not the same as European settlement mentioned here, right? These are two different things. So it's a factual inaccuracy. Uh, Saying as a result of developments in navigation technology, European colonialism led to displacement of indigenous people. As a result, even though the words just like due to are the same, but it doesn't communicate that a change was necessary, a change was created in whatever was the concept of colonialism. So it's problematic, and it doesn't cover this idea that colonialism is not modern. So two we eliminated again for very specific reasons. With three also we had very specific reasons, and even the four was still sort of problematic. It was because it didn't mention that it's not modern, or it's sort of didn't imply that it's quite common colonialism. Despite this, four is the only option we evaluated which we could accept, right? So the objective of this being the first question was that we know how to actually use and work on all of these three factors, comprehend in a specific way, use a methodical approach, and be evidence based, right? So these are really extremely important things, or basics, one can say, that you would have to ingrain in your solving, right? These should become second nature. Doesn't matter how difficult the paper comes or how less of time, generally because of level of difficulty of the paper, students have per question. Your uh, consistency in terms of your ability to optimize your knowledge and optimize your ability over time should still be intact, meaning that compared to the rest of the students, even though the paper is really hard, your score should still be better if you have all of these ingrained. Okay. So that's a lot of talk, but I think the strategy is really important if I want to highlight it in a specific way. Let me actually try and show you another question type. Okay. This is again a 2023 question as far as I know. It's asking us to put together these four statements in a specific order. The order should give us a paragraph which makes sense, a coherent paragraph. Okay. Please get started. Tell me a sequence like B, D, C, A, something like this, using 1, 2, 3, 4. That could go here. I'll just wait for a moment. All right, let's actually start discussing this question. And this brings me to the second point that I wanted to make about being methodical, right? Most students end up reading from 1 to 4 and then being confused about what could be the sequence. Some start putting together that information and forming a sequence. But still, this is like reading the least ideal sequence, right? If you read from 1 to 4, you're reading this in the least ideal sequence, meaning we have to find the best coherent sequence. Let's say, for the sake of discussion, BDCA is the right sequence. Then ABCD in this case would be the worst, least ideal sequence, because the examiner has crafted it in such a way that reading it is either going to leave us confused or is going to make it difficult to know main point of the author. Okay, so therefore we read from 4 to 1, and in reading from 4 to 1 we're looking for certain words and phrases which will help us notice patterns. So Western Christian concepts tend to deny or feign ignorance about the existence of a genuine and indigenous, enduring indigenous African tradition. So Western Christian concepts deny existence of enduring indigenous African tradition. This is what the sentence is talking about. We just notice this information right now, not any pattern as such. Then we go to sentence three, right? So what the first thing that I'm doing is I'm reading from 4 to 1. So I want to undo the trap that the examiner had set for me. uh, by going now to sentence 3, I notice some pattern. However, their views tells me that prior to sentence 3, whatever is referring to views, eh, that phrase is plural, right? It's not saying his views, her views, it's saying their views. So I know somewhere prior to sentence 3, whatever sentence came, it's referring to some opinions of a group. Their views contradict the reality, for a rich and sustaining local African cultural ethos exists for all who care to see and experience. So we notice that sentence 3 and sentence 4 might very well be in this order, right? This is what we would call in our classes something called a mandatory pair. A mandatory pair means this is the only way you can arrange these two sentences, and in no other way. 3, 4 is not possible. A gap between them is not possible, etc., etc. Right? So 4, 3 is the only mandatory pair. But we don't fix it up at this stage, because another thing that we practice in the method is we create the sequence only after we've gone through all the information. Examiners are going to choose passages or create changes in passages that is going to make such simple arrangement difficult maybe to find sometimes. So we don't trust that arrangement immediately. Okay, so we have this clue here, and local African cultural ethos exists, talks about this denying enduring indigenous African tradition. It essentially tells us that this idea of there is no African tradition is invalid. Now let's look at two. Some seemingly this person is probably some African author explores the conflict and casts the Western tradition as condescending, uh, and enveloping and unaccommodating toward local African practice. So, firstly, the phrase in two that you'll learn to pay attention to. I've done these classes, by the way, on you'll find them in the Career Launcher channel in the live section, where I've gone through this method in detail for all the questions. So the conflict tells me that prior to sentence 2, the conflict has been highlighted. So that means that would be 4 and 3 possibly have been discussed prior, right? So maybe it's like this, but we don't confirm this. The conflict is explored by this author, and he sees the Western tradition as unaccommodating. It's essentially exclusive. It's not allowing for African uh, social progress or genius to be accepted. Let's look at statement one. Contemporary African writing like XYZ voices this theme using two children and two backgrounds to juxtapose two varying cultures. So uses this theme. Now, suppose you didn't know the meaning of juxtapose, which is to place them side by side and compare. Uh, you just understand from the first sentence that today's contemporary writing, African writing, voices this theme and the two varying cultures. Okay. So here we get 4-3 as a mandatory pair. And the reason being, and this is 100% right, because their views refers to a plural group. There is no plural group in two, there is no plural group in one. So 4-3 is the only possible way to arrange this. So this is great. Now what happens is, and if you notice the 2023 attempt that students have taken, there's a big confusion between 4-3-2-1 and 4-3-1-2. Many students had actually, and I mean many faculty members had actually felt that this would be the right answer, right? But how do I confirm, how do I make a decision between 2-1 or 1-2? Do I guess, or is there anything else that is available to me to make this decision? And this is an important question for us to figure that out. Like, is there a way for me to have a definite answer to this? And yes, there is. uh, First is that, is this person an example? Because if you notice, this 2 says the conflict has been explored by this person, and the conflict considers Western tradition as unaccommodating, right? This is about, seemingly, again, we don't know for sure, but this is about all of contemporary African writing, like the Bottle Leopard. This writing is supposed to compare, voices this theme and compares these two cultures, correct? So what could be the case, we can't be sure, is that 2, which is this author, is an example of 1. Now we know one thing, that sentences 1 2 or 2 1 will follow 4 3. They'll come after sentences 4 3 for sure. They can't appear before sentences 4 3. That's because they, both those sentences 1 2 and 2 1 are referring to this theme and the conflict. So again, what I want all of you to take away from this is, my method is extremely repetitive and I know what exactly I'm supposed to do. And that ability allows me to actually maintain a routine like approach and maintain consistency. The other thing is about the decision making process. My approach is always evidence based, even for each option in the main point summary question, which also you'll see a lot of times in the exam. And in this case, in the parajumble odd question, my approach is evidence based. It's not based on how I feel 4-3-2-1 sounds versus 4-3-1-2 sounds. Many students and people who are solving the questions might end up thinking that this is a good approach. It's not. We want evidence, and 4-3 tells me that now I should start talking about, since these views contradict reality, what could take place next. This theme of sort of racism and two backgrounds, two varying cultures, is what is the outcome of their views. And the reason why is, sentence 2 is actually an example of sentence 1, right? So 4-3-1-2 is the correct sequence. It's taken from a 2004 article in some African literary journal, I think. You can go and look it up. So this is the actual sequence or the passage which was taken. And if you notice, we can spot the, which is what we did, we can spot the main point of the author if we pay attention to those keywords which we noticed here, right? Such as, one moment, Western concepts, Christian concepts tend to be ignorant about existence of enduring indigenous African tradition. However, their views, which is the Western Christian concept views contradict reality. Today's African writing voices this idea of how their views are wrong, and it uses two backgrounds to compare. This author seems to be an example of this sort of modern African writing, and this author thinks that the European writings are unaccommodating uh, indi- towards indigenous Africans. All right, so 4312 is the correct sequence. So what I tried to do today from the two questions that I've solved so far is try to highlight this idea of what is required for 99 percentile. So let me actually go through that first and on one uh, in one location for all of you all. Okay, so uh, simplify and evaluate everything that we have to do in the exam. This process also can be subdivided into a method. Each question will have a method, right? An inference question has a specific formula, an assumption question has a specific formula, so on and so forth. And formula is like a sort of grandiose way of terming it, but it has sort of a rough science, inference and assumption questions. Uh, but there is a definite method that we should follow in each of those. So being extremely methodical and using evidence for every choice you make in the exam, right? This could be picking a passage versus not choosing a passage to solve. This could be picking one option over others, etc. Always use evidence and not let me just write this, not on how it sounds. This is not really a good approach for any choices that you would make in the exam. Okay. So being methodical, using evidence for every choice. If you want to make linear progress in VARC, remember for every incorrect question, explore why. So figure out why wrong. These are extremely important for you to actually build the base which can push you towards this 99 percentile. All right. Then you'll have to perfect individual concepts. Okay. Now, which brings me to practice. So I have a few minutes left and I want to actually discuss what sort of practice should you undertake to actually get this score of 99 percentile, right? So I hope all of you have made a note of this, or you can just revisit this. We can just, for the sake of ease, number these, and let's say these five are extremely important for us to do as a base. Okay. Now, each time you're engaging in any kind of practice, make a clear distinction between are you working on that skill or are you working on performance? What is the distinction between the two? I'll just highlight shortly. But what I want you to know is that if I'm working on a specific skill, or if I know a specific skill, like let's say I'm really good at inference questions, that doesn't mean that in the exam I'm going to get all inference questions wrong, right? Or it doesn't even mean that in the exam I'm going to do really well because I'm good at inference questions. So there is a difference between skill and performance. In skill, we are checking whether we know the fundamentals of solving a thing, right? Do we know how to read the passage in an orderly way, in a way where we are left with one main point of the author? Do we know how inferences work? Do we know which is inferences subsume or include uh, implied and suggested by the author and conclusions, etc. And the other major answer type is question type is assumptions. Do you know these concepts, right? Do you have the skill of comparing options, right? So these things are actually tested in skill, whereas in performance we are checked whether we can apply skills under pressure, right? apply skills under pressure. Now, how do I work on performance? I'll also mention that, but uh, what we're trying to develop in performance is not simply better skills. We are, of course, we face the speed challenge, but what we are trying to do is we are trying to actually build this sort of maturity in managing the paper. We can, again, in a slightly grandiose way, call it EQ, emotional quotient. But what I mean by that is, let's suppose the paper is not going your way. You notice that maybe the questions feel incorrect to you, what are you're solving. It could be in passages, quant or reasoning, but let's stick to passages. Maybe you find that you aren't convinced about choices you made. So is this feeling going to affect the next question or not? And is this going to then uh, change how your attempt goes? So you need to control these factors. So these are all the factors that we need to figure out in terms of performance. So when you sit down to practice, you need to make a clear choice between what you're working on. Suppose today I taught you, for the sake of discussion again, uh, para summary questions, which is a prominent question type. We can expect two questions in the exam. And I spoke of the method in sort of detail. So let's say you have grasped the skill of solving para summary questions. You know how it works, the fundamentals work. You're really good at comparing options and evaluating those options, and you know how to solve that question. So now what you want to do is test whether this can actually work in performance. So what you do is you take a mock test, which is a previous year paper test, or you take in the career launcher aspiration account. You'll find like lots of questions of para summary, so you which are timed actually like a test. So you take that, it's called a topic test, right? So you take that para summary topic test or tests. There are multiple tests actually, and what you'll be tested on is solving four or let's say five para summary questions in a given set of time, and then your accuracy over is evaluated for that. Correct? So the distinction is that in skill we worked on our fundamentals, but here now we are working on speed. We are working on this idea that maybe the questions aren't going according to what I think they should go like, and we need to then maintain our ability to still manage the paper and deal with pressure. So all of these factors need to be worked on separately. What happens is students work on a mixed set of things, right? You just sit down to practice for an hour and you don't know whether you're working on skill or you're working on performance, and then you're done after that hour. So again, that growth or that improvement is not linear. You want to make sure that you are improving in a linear fashion in the exam. You want to distribute time between working on skills and performance. Both have to be practiced simultaneously, and both have to be practiced uh, with a specific goal in mind, right? So para summary has to be worked on, inferences have to be worked on, assumptions have to be worked on as skills, and then you also need to learn to apply them in the actual exam or the mock test, right? So then you work on performance. Okay, so then you can see there are multiple question types which can be asked, such as parajumble odd. These are paragraphs, such as this paragraph taken and mixed, and then we have to identify one of them as odd. Then you'll get para completion type questions where sentences are removed and you need to check where the sentence would fit. So you're going to get tested in different ways, but as long as your overall approach, right, includes simplify, evaluate, being extremely methodical, knowing why you're wrong, etc. These things are going to carry the most amount of weight in terms of moving you towards that 99.9 percentile. I want you to just keep this practice method in mind. I haven't really recommended to you the number of tests to take, but in the CL program you'll get 30 tests, 30 mock tests, full length mock tests. So that should, the fact that we are giving you those many tests, or I think even more if you include the all India mock test, the fact that we are giving you so many tests should give you a good inclination of how much practice is required. Students who take almost close to all the mock tests are usually also the students who get 99.9 percentile. We have historical record of this taking place, that The students who take close to all our tests get that score. So that tells you that there is a certain number of papers you need to solve, right? Let's take it somewhere above 20, 25 plus if you take the data we have. So solve a lot of previous year papers, solve a lot of mock tests, and your idea should be to hit that 20, 25 mock test number. But do that while you're working on skill and determine what you're working on. All right. So I think in terms of what is actually important and not just, using any general tricks of solving etc approach, I've actually covered what I feel is key for us getting 99 percentile. Remember that the challenge at the end of the day always will is going to remain speed, and the only way you can figure that out is through lots and lots and lots of practice, right? So I think this covers what is required. In terms of what is required from you also is a lot of commitment and regular practice. So keep that approach going, and I'll see you in the next class next week. If you have any particular doubts that were not addressed or any part of strategy that is left out, do leave us your feedback and we'll actually include that. So thank you everyone, and I'll see you next week.